We're in an era where it seems like there's a brand new multiplayer-only title released every day. With as big as gaming is, it's easy to assume that there's enough people to go around for every single one of them, but unfortunately that's not the case. Most of these games end up dying. Some of them end up dying pretty quick, and the lucky few can last years or even over a decade. I'm looking at you, TF2. Plenty of these games die immediately as soon as they come out. Maybe it was too high of a price point, or there wasn't enough of a marketing push, or whatever it is. Just players didn't have enough time to fall in love with it. But there is a small set of games that, instead of dying quickly or staying around for a long time, they just die a slow and painful death. And today I want to talk a little bit about what it's like to love one of these games. First, let's talk about the 4 phases that I've identified in a dying game. First, we have the honeymoon phase. This is the period of time where the game is brand new and a ton of people are diving in all at the same time. Almost everybody is new, and with such a large player base, the matchmaking systems don't really have any issue finding decent games for players. This is probably the most exciting time to play and the time where most new people dive in. Most people are just as bad and as clueless as you are, and you're all discovering the nuances of the game together. This phase lasts a week or so. Next comes the comfort phase, and this happens after most people who didn't like the game have already tried it and left. This is probably right after the initial launch push. By now, you probably understand the game if you dove in at the beginning, at least to the level of knowing how to play to the objectives, whatever they happen to be. You and the rest of those that are still enjoying the game have played enough by this point to get some really fun games from the matchmaking system more often than not. You may still run into some new players, but they're more likely to be matched together than they are to be matched with you. This is probably the most consistently fun phase and will last anywhere from a week to many years, depending on the game. But after that is where it starts to get dire. If, for whatever reason, the game has failed to hook a large number of players, the snowball phase is eventually going to begin. This happens once the population drops significantly enough, but exactly how low the population needs to be is dependent on the type of game that it is. For example, a game like Battleborn, where each match could last up to an hour and there were at least 3 separate PvP game modes on top of a campaign mode, with the population even further split into separate matchmaking regions, the requirement to enter this snowball phase is still a pretty decently healthy-looking population if you were to look at the Steam charts. Generally speaking, the more players there are per match, and the longer the average match length is, and the more disparate game modes that there are available, the quicker the game is going to enter this phase. The snowball phase is defined by the tragic cycle of long queues, mismatched teams, and frustrating games as a result of those. When the population of a game drops low enough, the matchmaking system is going to be forced to make sacrifices to speed up the queue times. This may result in a poor match between teams where one team is completely outskilled and out-experienced by the other, making it a quick and painful stomp. This is not fun or challenging for the winning team, but doubly so for the losing team who can't even hope to compete or even really play the game. Because games like this tend to punish players for leaving early, everyone is stuck in this match until one team surrenders or the other wins. And for somebody in this match, this one was the last straw. Spending 5 to 10 minutes in a queue for a match just to not have fun is an easy way to just want to quit and find your fun elsewhere. So people leave because of these frustrating matches. This makes the queues longer, and the matchmaking system is forced to pair people together to get games going, causing more frustrating matches and causing more and more people to quit. You can probably guess why I call this the snowball phase. Unfortunately, players continue to leave faster than they come in, and this phase is going to last all the way until...
What's up everybody, it's Critical.
The critical phase is the final phase before the game outright dies, and might even be considered already dead at this point to most people. This phase overlaps with the end of the snowball phase, and the exact timing will change from person to person depending on each individual player's patience with the inevitably terrible matchups that they're going to be forced to deal with. At this point, it's not uncommon to sit in a matchmaking queue for over 10 minutes without a match, and anyone new that's trying the game that happens to get into match is going to be matched against people with dozens to hundreds of hours of experience. At this point, the game is at least effectively dead, and the only way to get a game going is with bots, which are rarely enjoyable to play against, or by organizing a match yourself. Once you personally decide that the game is in a critical condition, it's easy to leave. You're probably spending more time waiting in a queue than actually playing the game, and when you actually do get to play the game, it's not going to be a fun match. It's very often going to be a one-sided match that doesn't challenge or engage you. Out of all 4 of these phases, the one that's most important to this specific video is the Snowball Phase. This is where most players that enjoy the game are desperately clinging to its life and trying to have as much fun as possible to keep it alive as long as possible, hopeful for an eventual revival. But unfortunately, it seems that whenever a game does enter this phase, the odds are already stacked against them. Now, as a person who's really enjoyed many games that have gone through this cycle, I'm not going to sit here and try to defend any of these games. There's a reason that most of these games that I liked failed to hook players and keep them invested for a longer period of time. Battleborn, for example, had very poor character balance and overly messy visuals that were just a chore to even look at. Gigantic had multiple terrible launches on multiple different platforms, and each one was plagued by terrible technical issues that made it so that lower-end PCs couldn't even launch the game. And the game that I'm currently spending a lot of time in, Crucible, has a very poor onboarding experience and doesn't really convey what the game is correctly to new players. This leads to confusion and frustration, and they leave. So yeah, each of these games have valid issues and perfectly reasonable reasons why they fail to hook players. But what sucks is by the time the game enters the Snowball Phase, a lot of the damage is already done and public perception is already bad. For example, anybody who's played Battleborn can tell you that it's the farthest thing away from Overwatch that you can be while being a first-person shooter. Overwatch is more like Team Fortress 2, with brighter graphics and more colorful characters. Battleborn, on the other hand, is more like a traditional MOBA. Just instead of clicking around, you're shooting at people. But I wouldn't be surprised if you know at least one person who, if you ask them about Battleborn, they'll just be like, wasn't that just a worse Overwatch? It's hard to know where this perception and misinformation comes from at the beginning, but for a lot of these dying games, it happens. For example, as somebody who's played over 100 hours of Crucible at this point and actually unironically legitimately enjoys it, I'm finding a lot of terrible and frustrating misinformation on the game's own Steam forums, and a lot of just some weird hatred coming from some people. For example, one night I was watching a stream from one of the developers of Crucible, John Peters, and there was somebody in chat who was just trolling the developer, telling him that his game was terrible, that he should remove it off of Steam, and that if he doesn't remove it from Steam, he has no dignity. This guy was even spelling the developer's name wrong. Here's a post where somebody shares a poorly received game from a developer who happens to share the same name as the people who made Crucible. Just a little bit of quick research can show you that the people that made this game are not the same as the people who made Crucible. But if you spend any amount of time on the Crucible forums on Steam, you can see this same person with the same avatar and a few other people just in almost every single topic, telling other people how bad the game is, or that they shouldn't play it, or laughing because the game is failing, or just taking some sense of sick satisfaction for the game's poor reception and the game's impending death. And that's just frustrating to see as a person that really enjoys the game. If you're a person who likes one of these games, you probably want more people to play it so you can have better matches, so you can counteract that snowball effect. But there's people like this that exist that legitimately seem to get their rocks off by trolling the community and the developers of this game. And it blows my mind. By the time the game enters the Snowball Phase, most people have made up their mind on their opinion of the game. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. But to hang out on public forums, spreading misinformation while also saying things that you have better things to do than to play this game that, in their words, sucks, is bad, and is objectively not fun, is really frustrating. If you're a person that loves one of these games while it's dying, then eventually you have to let go. At some point, the Snowball Phase is going to get to you as well. The games are going to stop being fun, the queues are going to stop being worth it, and you're going to walk away and find something better to do. But in the back of your mind, you're always going to wonder, what would have happened if this game succeeded? Would Battleborn have spawned more and better versions of itself? Would we have seen more first-person MOBAs? A genre that I personally really enjoy, but we haven't seen enough of? What if Gigantic succeeded? Would it have a vibrant community? Would the developers still be making new heroes and balancing the game and making it more fun than it already was? For better or worse, I think these are the games that stick with you. As much as I enjoyed Overwatch at the time, my memories of it aren't quite as vivid as my memories of Gigantic, or even my memories of Battleborn. If you're lucky, you never run into this situation. Maybe you're even watching this video and you didn't know it at the time, but looking back on it, you were playing a game during the Snowball Phase because you really enjoyed it, and then the reasons that I mentioned ended up chasing you away. Personally, I'm still holding out hope for my current dying game, Crucible. It released with poor reception, and the developers brought it back into closed beta in an attempt to revitalize it, hone its potential, and hopefully create a game that's much easier to digest and will keep people around for a long time. But as it is right now, it's in the Snowball Phase, more and more people quitting every day, and matches very often are just not fun anymore. That's not going to stop me from holding out hope, though. One of these needs to survive. It's just a matter of time, right? I'm curious to hear what you all think. If you made it this far in the video, please let me know in the comments if you have played a dying game while it was dying. It might even be Battleborn, or Lawbreakers, or Gigantic, or maybe even Crucible, but please let me know what your experience is like, what eventually made you quit that game, and of course what that game was, and maybe even why you liked it. It's an unfortunate reality that most multiplayer-only games are doomed to fail. And tragically, those games that fail, there are at least a few people that really, really enjoyed it. Anyway, I want to stop this video from getting way too rambly, but I do want to thank Eric Lawrence for being a channel member at the highest tier, and for the rest of you, thanks for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you next time.